Hey everybody, it's time for this week's 5 Minutes to Monday. Let's talk a little bit about workplace safety, warehousing, and what's gone on around the country in the last week. So this is the week of August 21st in 2026. So we'll go down through it. So this week's OSHA's regulatory update. Let's go through this real quick. First, we've had a deadly industrial explosion. I believe it was in Ohio. In Michigan, OSHA sounding the alarm after 20 industrial deaths already this year. And then we had a manufacturing chemical exposure that resulted in a fire, or exposures that they demonstrate why PELs matter, action level matters, and we have to do stuff. Just because we're below PELs doesn't mean we don't have to do anything. Okay, so let's talk about some of these. So federal OSHA hasn't published any new citations or since July 30th is the last date I have over here. So I'm not going to recycle a July case and call it new or this week's topic. Instead, let's just look at what we got, use it as an emphasis to go out onto the floor this week and see what's going on. So the three top stories this week, let's get into it, right? So in an Ohio industrial recycling facility on Tuesday, August 18th, there were explosions at Brent Industries in Toledo. It was shortly before 5 a.m. during a shift change is where this happened. So this facility warehoused some hazardous materials. They had some large tanks of stuff, and a major fire broke out there. So it's still under investigation. We have zero idea, or at least I do. I did a little digging, not much. But we really don't know any of the specifics yet, so I'm not going to speculate on what happened there. There's enough tragedy there. 2 workers died. That's all we really need to know right now, right? So let's pray for their families. But let's take away our opportunity from this, and let's what we can do because of the fire. Usually when there's an initial explosion or fire, there's a lot of secondary stuff that happens afterwards. So let's pull out our emergency response plans and figure out, have we accounted for that, right? Have we accounted for what's going to happen if something happens? What about the secondary exposures? How have we prepared our team for not going in? Just because we had that happen first doesn't mean it's now safe to go in. There's secondary explosion, especially if you're talking about chemicals being stored on site, stuff like that. So you also have very real possibility of additional explosions and structural collapse, right? Hazardous runoff. What about your team? Can you account for everybody on site within 5 minutes? So when emergency responders do arrive, you can tell them whether you have people trapped inside or not, right? And so, this goes back to the Pulp situation from earlier in the summer where those 2 young people were killed. So something to look at. Airborne contaminants. Have we accounted for that? What about the wind shift change? Have we accounted for where we're going to gather in the event of something like that? So let's do that. Now, Michigan also came out and they sounded the alarm after 20 deaths already this year. So they had pretty basic message, right? It's nothing over the top. It's really basic, but if you think about it, that's what they're seeing is we're killing people from the basics. So let's take a look at it, right? So assess hazards before the work starts. Don't just send people in there. Take that. Man, it only takes 2 minutes. Sit down and go through it. This is what we're going to be exposed to. Make sure you check. Don't get in the way of the moving forklifts. Don't put yourself in a place where you can be crushed. Don't reach into a piece of equipment that isn't thoroughly locked out. Things like this, right? And once you've done that initial assessment, a JSA, JHA, whatever you want to call it, if the situation changes, are you stopping and then reassessing it, right? Stop work, reassess. Do we have everything we need? Do we need to change where people are located? Have we informed everybody that the situation has changed? All basic stuff that we need to be doing, guys. So stop work authority. Does your team know if something's dangerous, if there's a real hazard there, they have the authority to stop work, and let's just take a second and reassess and make sure we're good to go. It doesn't take much. It all seems so very simple, but so much of what we do in this career is pretty simple. It's not easy to wrangle in because we deal with people, but the steps that it takes sometimes to save a life, save a hand, save a finger, save an eye, is just a second. Let's just stop and take 30 seconds and talk about this, right? There was a Virginia manufacturer in the third thing that we brought up this week. A Condair Group was cited for just about $40,000, where two workers, there was a complaint, so it came from the workforce, where two workers were exposed to formaldehyde above the applicable action level. Now, what I got out of this, it was a formaldehyde exposure, but the exposure didn't exceed permissible exposure limits, or the PEL, which is where you have to have people in masks and all this stuff. But it looks like it was above the action level. If you know, it goes, you got your action level, and then your permissible exposure levels are always higher. I shouldn't say always, I guess I don't know that for a fact, but my assumption is that, right? Action level says you need to start taking some actions here, right? So in this case, it sounds like, formaldehyde, you'd have to have, are you doing your annual medical exams? Are we doing annual reassessments of our plan? Are we training people that this is a hazard, that you could potentially be exposed higher? Are there instances where it spikes? All this kind of stuff, and it looks like that's where this is coming. Is not necessarily that they were exposed to anything over that PEL, but there was a level of exposure there that they weren't addressing. Now, I'm kind of reading into that, so that's my assumption, is kind of what this is sounding like. So just because you're below a PEL does not mean there's nothing you have to do all the time, right? So let's make sure we're taking a look at that. So enforcement focus this week. So OSHA extended their national emphasis program on warehousing and distribution centers from 3 years to 5 years. So they're really looking at this. You think about the explosion in the size and how much like your Amazons of the world is going on right now, and all these distribution centers and everything like this. And so that's why they're emphasizing it, right? And so the inspections for this began July 31st. So they've been going on for a couple weeks. This is going to go on for 5 years. They're really going to be looking at it. So most manufacturing places I've been in have a warehouse area, right? If not a distribution center, they have a warehouse area, right? Mine happens to have a little bit of both. So let's take a look at it. So these inspections, when they come on site, they can address forklifts. I wrote down a list of things here just to make sure that we're being aware of it, right? So forklifts, 29 CFR 1910.178 or 179. One of them's cranes and overhead lifts, and one of them's forklifts. I believe forklifts it might be 179. I think it's 179. I'd have to go back and take a look. But one of those two will get you there, right? Material handling and storage, obviously, right? Are we storing stuff in a safe manner? You can't have stuff up and racking that's not secured, that could get bumped, rattled, vibrations, whatever, over time, and that stuff can come down, right? Are we inspecting our pallet racking? That's a big one in warehouses, because that stuff gets hit a lot. Are we inspecting it, clearing it, repairing it as we go, replacing beams or uprights, whatever we need to do? Make sure we're checking that out. Walking working surfaces. Do we have segregated areas, or have we defined where pedestrians go versus forklifts go? Pedestrian and lift interaction is huge. People get hit all the time. People get crushed by stuff. So let's take a look at that. Exits. So now this one sneaks up and gets people all the time, and you can walk around, and I've worked in several different industries, and in every case you can walk around, and sooner or later somebody, they had never intend to do it, they set it down just for a second, because with a forklift they set a pallet down and you're blocking an emergency exit. Mark those exits. Make sure you're staying on top of your workforce, that we're not setting stuff down in front of emergency exits, because when stuff happens, it's never when you plan it. It's always an emergency. Lights go off. People are stumbling around trying to get places. Do not let them get tripped up because we've piled stuff up in front of the emergency exit. So make sure we're checking that. We're in the throes of, we're in August, right? We're in summertime. It's been a hot one this year. Make sure we're accounting for the heat exposure to our team members, especially if they're going in and out of truck trailers and working out in yard and stuff like that. This will really make sure, and you're not safe from it just because you're inside an air condition, right? Make sure we're accounting for people. Ergonomics is a big one in warehousing, right? Because people are lifting and moving, and usually in some of these high speed settings, they are turning and twisting and doing all sorts of stuff and exposed to heavy packages, light packages, you name it. So let's make we're doing that. And then fire protection. Your risk companies are looking at this stuff, and they're really assessing, are you set up that if a fire starts, it's going to go down? That's why flue spaces in between your racking and in between pallets on that racking. Do you have free flow for water to come down if those racks catch on fire, right? Do you have plastics on that racking? Plastics tend to burn higher, right? So is the material you're sitting up there able to the water to run freely through it and get to lower levels, or is that stuff going to hold water so it can't get to the lower levels, in which case a lot of times that water gets pretty heavy? Are you all of a sudden now overloading your material storage racking, and you could have a collapse? A lot of stuff to take into consideration. And then finally, think about this. So increasingly you're getting moving conveyors, you're getting robots, you're getting stuff like that. So pallet wrappers, right? Pallet wrappers, you got vertical style, you have the horizontal style, you have all sorts of things. Do you have machine guarding there to protect your workers from getting caught in there? I've heard of people getting wrapped up in pallet wrapping machines before. Horrible. That's got to be horrible, right? So make sure we're accounting for that, and that's why we're going to focus a little bit on machine guarding today, just because I have seen in the past is in the, you know, it's you're saving your workers' backs, and you're doing an ergonomic plan by bringing in a pallet wrapper. You put that pallet wrapper in, it's great, it just seems there, but you don't think about the fact that your employees are now exposed. If you don't have some caging up around that, some fencing up around it, put some light curtains in, maybe some pressure mats, whatever you have to do something so they're not getting caught or crushed in between things for something that you brought in to help them. Always think about that. It's a little added expense at the end of it, but folks, it's so much safer, it's so much better. And the tragedy that would be if somebody were to get caught up in that and, you know, hurt, if not killed. So let's really make sure we're taking a look at that. I want to go over here and make sure I'm not forgetting anything. So yeah, so don't, if you got a plant and you got a warehouse and everything, it's easy to forget about that warehouse. The warehouse always seems like it just kind of runs on its own, and the people know what they're doing. They're doing the same thing over and over, day in and day out, and they're getting stuff out to your manufacturing floor. And obviously you have a lot to be worried about out on the manufacturing floor all the time. You're trying to account for every action of every person, but don't forget about that materials warehouse. So much stuff can happen back there. So take an hour, half an hour this week, go out there and just observe and walk up and down the racks. Take a look at things. Do you have your bases covered in that warehousing area? Again, it's a national emphasis program, so they're coming in looking specifically at that stuff. Take a look at your forklifts and your drivers. Are they doing things safely? All this good stuff that has to be fixed in there. So our featured standard, as I just referred to, because of these pallet wrappers and stuff like that, and because of some recent stuff that we've talked about on here, right, is 29 CFR 1910.212 or 212. That is our machine guarding standard. Pull this thing out, guys, and take a look at it this week. Go out there. It's pretty quick to put light curtains in. Pretty quick to put in interlocks, magnetic interlocks on a door that if somebody opens it, that machine shuts down and it has to get reset to start up again, because you can walk around it and walk by this stuff day in and day out and just never registers. So look at it and take yourself and just look at it with fresh eyes. Just say, I'm going to look at every piece of equipment like I don't understand what it is. Even if you think you know it inside out, go out there, talk with those operators. Do you ever have to reach in around moving stuff? Do you ever do that? And you know, just go to them like nobody's in trouble. We just want to know the reality of the situation, because you guys use this every day, and we can set it up and it looks great on a piece of paper. And I've watched the videos, and I watched the initial day we went out there and we got this thing up and running and everything was great. But over time, have shortcuts work their way into the workforce. That happens all the time, guys. Make sure you're looking at it. You know, there was, you know, not that got awful long ago. I was walking by a piece of equipment in one of my former workplaces, and we thought we had everything. We had put some bells and whistles on a large industrial bandsaw. so for lighting and stuff, so we knew when that thing was running that people couldn't get hurt when they got up around that. We added on to the original manufacturer's machine guarding, so that blade was guarded a little better than we thought it could have. So we did a lot of stuff with there, and we were happy, and we had been audited by our company at the time, and everything was good there. And walking by, and there's a little door on the bottom of that, right below the table where they would work, and I just kind of grabbed the door and it popped right open. And I said, well, I didn't see an interlock. Is this interlocked? No, it's not interlocked. And you could look right in there, and there was the blade. And so if that thing would have been running, and we started up, and sure enough, that thing ran, and that door was open, and somebody could have put a knee into that accidentally or reached in to do something, because there's a lot of big open space, right? And you reach in, but then you trip or something happens, and now you're up against that blade. So we ended up putting an interlock on that door, and that's something that we had walked by and we had inspected. So you're gonna miss some stuff sometimes. Make sure you're going back through and looking for that stuff and accounting for it. You'll thank yourself later when nobody's ever been hurt on that piece of equipment by the time it gets retired, right? So remember, when do you gotta guard something? If a machine exposes an employee to moving parts, ingoing nip points, right, where you can get caught between rollers and get pulled in, rotating parts, flying chips, sparks, anything like that can cause injury. You've got to guard it. If it's got a movable guard, right? A lot of times, you think about a drill press table. They got the movable guard because you got to go in and out, change the drill bits, do whatever like that. Are your employees putting that back when they're using it? It's got to be in place. If it's provided, it's got to be in place to provide as much protection as possible. They're not perfect, right? But we got to do that. And again, remember the quick and easy way to remember it. It's OUTA, O-U-T-A. Can an employee reach over, under, through, or around that guard to get to moving parts? And if they can, how do you protect them against that? How do you guard that? Sometimes it's simple, adding a piece of metal, adding some fencing. Sometimes it's not perfect. Sometimes, because of the way the equipment works, the only thing you can do is administrative controls, right? And do not go. Can you add a pressure mat? Can you put a light curtain in? Do something like that to protect our employees. So folks, that's this week's 5 minutes to Monday. I hope everybody has a safe week. Let's wrap up. I think we're going into our last week of August. Let's get through this month and nobody gets hurt, guys. All right? Papa Todd Takes. I am Papa Todd. Have a safe week, everybody. Appreciate what you do for a living.